Should have enough, yeah. I don't want to intimidate anyone, if it's too close. It's scary. All right. Red means recording. Very good. Okay, so continuing on the Monday night shirim, the mitzvahs. So in this week's parsha, so there's no official mitzvah and Tariq mitzvahs mentioned in the parsha, but so just be a little creative, but it's not too creative. The truth is, so in the parsha we have the Petira, the passing away of Yaakov Avinu. And it talks about Yaakov Avinu Chintaya, that he's embalmed and eventually, he's buried in Mars Machpelah. They bring him, and so I figured it will be an opportunity to talk about one of the mitzvahs in the Torah, which is the mitzvah of kevura, of burying someone after they pass away. And so, again, it's a large topic with many different avenues that we can explore. We'll explore a certain aspect of it, and like I've mentioned many times, whenever whenever you learn something, the halacha of it is very limited. It's whatever the topic is. So this topic is going to be limited in halacha, practically in the body of the mitzvah. It's going to be limited to its particular expressions and halachas. But when you get to the pnimius of it, it becomes a derech and avodas Hashem. Every mitzvah becomes a complete mahalach and avodas Hashem that redefines all of our Yiddishkeit. Every mitzvah. That's why again I've mentioned this many times that one person says l'shem yichud before a mitzvah. So part of there's different nuschais for l'shem yichud. One of the aspects, one nusach of l'shem yichud is that you're about to do, let's say, put on tefillin. So you're putting on tefillin, and you say, I'm already muchad mezuman. I'm preparing myself to fulfill mitzvahs tefillin. The chol targum mitzvah tluyim ba, and all the 613 that's connected to tefillin. What 613 is connected to tefillin. So in pnimius, again, when you get into the pnimius of any particular mitzvah, it sheds light on all the 613. So there's going to be no different. As Hashem Yisparach we'll go through a little bit of the halachas of the mitzvah of kevura, and we'll investigate a little bit of the pnimius of it. And Bez Hashem, from there, we'll be able to have shed some light on really all of Yiddishkeit b'chlal. Okay, so it's like this. Like I said, there's different aspects of this mitzvah. So we're going to go through, just a few of them. We're going to go step by step. So we'll begin like this. In Marmukah number 1, we'll see if we can get through everything. Probably not, but we'll do the best we can. So in Marmukah number 1, it all begins with a pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze. That's really where this mitzvah of kevura, of again burying someone after they pass away. So it all begins in this parsha of Kiseitze. The pasuk over there, the context is talking about when a person is killed in Bezdin with particularly skila, or even within skila, particular averis that would warrant skila. So there's this mitzvah we're not going to be talking about right now, but the pasuk does say there's a mitzvah of after the person is killed to hang them on an eitz. The Mishnah talks about a Sanhedrin, doesn't mean a tree, a piece of wood to hang them just for a moment, not for a long period of time. And that's the pasuk. That's the context over here. So the pasuk says after a person is killed in Bezdin and they're hung just for a little bit of time. So it says in pasuk, "Lo yisalen nivlasei al ha'etz." Lo yisalen, don't let the person hang there for a long period of time. Lina, the word lina means for a elongated period. We'll see exactly the gather of it. Lo yisalen nivlasei al ha'etz. Don't let it be there for an extended period of time. Ki kaver tikberenu b'yaymuhu. But rather, the person should be buried that day. Because a human being, a yid, is it's a bizayin for the Rabbanu Shalom, for a human being, and specifically a Jew, to be sitting like that. And don't contaminate the land of Eretz Yisrael that the Rabbanu Shalom has given you. That's the pasuk. So again, that's the context of your person is killed, and after he's killed in Bezdin, so says the pasuk, don't let the body just hang out there for extended period of time. Rather bury him that day. It's a bizayin otherwise. That's the pasuk. Okay. Well, Bez Hashem, we'll see as time goes on tonight next few minutes to break down the pasuk in different particulars. But number one, according to Chazal, there are two mitzvahs contained in this pasuk. Two mitzvahs. One lois aseh and one aseh. Okay? One lois aseh, one negative mitzvah is lois salin. Lois salin. Now again, even though the context of the pasuk is specific to this particular case, a person killed in Bezdin, and the person is hanging on this pole, and the pasuk says, "Don't let him hang there for an extended period of time." We'll see soon. Chazal understand that this is not, even though the pasuk is talking about that particular case, that's just an example. But this is a general mitzvah that applies to anyone that passes away. But again, but we'll get to that Be'ez Hashem soon. But the first lois aseh is lois salin, that a person that passes away, this person that passed away, the person should not, the body should not sit, the lina should not take place. For the body just to sit there for an extended period of time, there's a lois aseh. That's a violation of a prohibition. That's number one. And then you have an aseh, ki kevura tikbarenu b'yom to bury the person that day. So it's a positive mitzvah of kevura tikbarenu. So it's an lois aseh and an aseh. Okay. So the first issue that the Rishonim and Acharim deal with is just the parameters of time. When exactly do these assays apply? When does the person have to be buried as it's obligated by the assay, and when does the person have to be buried as it's obligated by the lois assay? So in other words, let's break it down simply like this. The assay is pretty clear. It says ki kevura tikbarenu b'yom the person should be buried that day. So we know that in halacha, the way whatever a day is, right? So a calendar day ends by sunset. So if a person passes away, right? So this person is killed in Bezdin, for example. So he's killed not usually. A person is killed in Bezdin during the daytime. So let's say this person is killed at. I know it sounds very morbid. We're talking about this. Bezdin will get to the previous, and it'll come back to life. You'll see. But anyway, this person is killed 3:00 in the afternoon, whatever it is. So it's the middle of the day. That's when Bezdin would take care of these things during the day. So the pasuk says, "Ki kevura tikbarenu b'yom." So the assay is telling us that this person has to be buried before sunset, right? Sunset is the next day already, right? After sunset is the following day. So if Bezdin were to be negligent, or the Chavra Kaddish are negligent, and the person is not buried before sundown, so they violated the assay. That's kevura tikbarenu b'yom. Okay. What about lois salin? What about the negative prohibition? So the pasuk doesn't really give us a clear demarcation point of what's considered to be the body being left over, being sitting there too long. It says lois salin, don't let it sit there too long. But what does it mean too long? So it's unclear. It's a certain amount of hours. Is another demarcation point? It's unclear. So this is where it becomes a little bit of a machlokes. The sheet of the Ramban, we'll see in a second in the Marmakaimis, the Ramban and the Rilunil, a number of Rishonim hold that because the lois assay is vague in terms of it giving us a clear demarcation point of like, okay, you cross this line of time, you are now in violation of lois assay. It's not clear. It just says don't let it sit too long. But the assay is clear that it's that particular calendar day, and that's the line that you have to make sure you don't cross, that the person has to be buried within that calendar day. Since the lois assay is unclear, but the assay is, so the Ramban, as we'll see in a moment, and other Rishonim hold, that the assay comes and clarifies the lois assay. So even though the lois assay is not clear, since the assay is clear that it's that day, we'll assume that's what the lois assay means as well. So therefore, as we'll see in a second, this camp of Rishonim hold that both the assay and the lois assay are telling us the same thing, which is that if the person is killed in Bezdin, 1:00 in the afternoon, 9 in the morning, whatever it is, the assay tells us kevura tikbarenu b'yom. There's a positive mitzvah to bury the person before sundown, while it's still that day, and there's an aver of lois salin. Don't let the body sit too long. What does it mean too long? It means past that particular day. So both the assay and the lois assay have the same basic parameters. It's that particular day, and if you do it properly, if you bury the person within the day, you're fulfilling an assay, and if you delay it, as we'll see, there's certain exceptions, but if you delay it, then you violated an assay and a lois assay. Yeah, that's the Rishonim. You'll see in a second. So Marmukah number 2, the Ramban on Chumash over there says the following thing: Vini hamolin tolei al ha'etz. If a person allows the body to sit too long, the person violates leisalin. He violates both. In other words, the Ramban is putting both the leisasei and the asay in the same sentence, in the same context, that whatever by not burying the person, quote unquote, right away, you're in violation of both asay and the leisasei. In other words, what the Ramban is saying is that the asay and the leisasei have the same parameters, the same guidelines. Whatever the demarcation point is, that the asay is telling you, don't pass that particular point in time. That's what the leisasei is telling you, the same thing. So it's they're both telling you the same idea, which is bury the person that particular calendar day. You cross over that border of time without the person being buried, then you violated both asay and the leisasei. That's the Ramban. Yeah? Oh, very good, very good. Yeah, very good, very good, very good. We're going to see that in a second. Very, very good. So it's like this. Marmukah number 3, the Real O'Neill, one of the Rishonim also makes the same point. Hamolan esmeisai, someone that leaves the body over, that does lina, right? Like the pasuk says, loy salin. Kloimer she'ena kevura b'isei hayom atzmo. And he spells it out clearly. It means that you didn't bury him that day, like the asay indicates. Shemeis by, then you're in violation of the leis asay. So this is, again, you're right. As we'll see in a second, lina usually means overnight. Over here, since the pasuk, if you go back to the pasuk in Marmukah number 1, leisalin evlasei, it's ki cover tikberenu b'yomahu. So if it was just leisalin evlasei, it's one pasuk standing alone independently, then maybe you would say that. But because the pasuk itself then continues, ki cover tikberenu b'yomahu, meaning don't do leisalin, rather bury him that day. So it's indicative that over here leisalin means that day as well. That's the argument that these Rishonim make. But it's not just Ari against the Ramban. You have a backup. Okay, you have backup. The Marmukah number 4, there's a tshuva from the Radvaz. Okay, the Radvaz, so the early Achrayim, he was I think he was the chief rabbi of Egypt at the time. So he was one of the great Achrayim. So he writes the following thing. He doesn't bring down the Ramban that we saw in Chumash that puts the leisasei and the asay all together. He doesn't quote the Real O'Neill that says clearly that if you don't bury the person that day, you're violating the leisasei. But he says on his own the following point. You should know. Ki kol lina, hamur b'Torah, that term lina, of letting something or somebody, in this particular case, sit for too long, what does that word lina mean? So whenever you find it in Chumash, says Radvaz, eino ela halayla, it always means overnight. That's always what it means, overnight. Dichsev, so he gives a couple examples. Dichsev, it says in Pasuk, leisalin pu'ula sachir itcha ad baiker. This is a mitzvah, we talked about this during the summer. The pasuk says that if you owe someone money, you owe a worker money, don't let the wages sit overnight. In other words, if you owe him, if he's owed money, at a particular night, at night to get paid for the work that he did during that day, so you're not allowed to wait till sunrise to pay him. You have to pay him that particular night. And the word leisalin means don't let the wages sit overnight. Uksiv nami, or another example, layolin chelav chagi ad boiker. Don't let the fats and the meat of a carbon sit till the morning. And the word leisalin over here, again, means don't let it sit overnight. Don't let it sit throughout the night until the next morning. Mashma. And all these psukim, when it talks about the word lina, they all seem to indicate that the word lina means having something, whether it be the wages of a worker or pieces of a carbon, don't let it sit overnight. So having something sit overnight all the way through the nighttime till sunrise, that's usually a description of lina, of something that experienced lina, is something that was sitting until sunrise. Hilkach, therefore says the Radvaz, krod leisalin ivlasei alates. So you go back to our pasuk, this leisasei that says, don't let the body sit, leisalin, don't let it sit too long. What does it mean, leisalin? Eino over belav ad sheyulenu kol halayla ad habayker. Says the Radvaz, therefore, if the word lina always means something sitting overnight, then in this case where it says leisalin ivlasei alates, it means don't let the body sit overnight until sunrise. And if the body sits overnight until sunrise, now you violated the leisasei. So says the Radvaz, the leisasei is telling us also, again, a certain time frame of when the person is supposed to be buried. And when is the leisasei telling us? The leisasei is saying, don't let it sit until sunrise. That's what it means, leisalin. Umikol malka mitzvah say, however, that's all the leisasei, says the Radvaz. The asei is clear, a different time frame. Lik for kol haruge bezdin, the assay is telling us to bury someone that's killed in bezdin, but yom hariga, the day that the person is killed. The chsiv ki kevura tikbrenu b'yom hahu. Therefore, says Radvaz, what comes out is that even though we have both a positive mitzvah and a negative prohibition regarding this topic of when a person that was killed in bezdin is supposed to be buried, but the time frame of the violations are different. The assay time frame is to fulfill the mitzvah of kevura. It has to be buried that day. The person has to be buried that day. In other words, before sundown. To violate the loisase, however, you have to not, even if you didn't bury the person by sundown, if the person is buried, if the person is not being buried until sunrise the next morning, that's leisalin. That's leisalin. So the assay is telling you bury the person by sundown. Leisalin is telling you bury the person by sunrise the next morning. If the bezdin was negligent and they waited till the next morning, then certainly they violated the assay by sunset already. They violated the assay, and then they violated the loisase by next morning. That's how the Radvaz puts it. Okay.
Loisase wouldn't necessarily buried. That would just be leaving him on LA.
So this is a discussion that we'll see in a second in Chazal. The assumption of Chazal is that it's lavdavka. It's lavdavka on the 8th. It's as long as the person is not buried. As the pasuk continues, ki kevura tikbrenu b'yom hahu. But it is a very good point that you're making. In parentheses, the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs, again, like I said, there's many different angles to go with this. But if you take a look at the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs, he seems to say that there's a certain chumrah in having the person sit on the 8th. But for our purposes, we'll assume not like that. Yeah, you're right. So in the Radvaz, he's definitely splitting it up. That the timeline of when the assay obligates a person and when the lois assay obligates a person, so certainly there's a difference. The assay kicks in much earlier. The assay kicks in by that day, before sunset, and the lois assay already gives you much more time to deal with. But they're both revolving on the same situation. The person has to be buried. Okay, so that's in terms of what's the time frame of burying this person. Okay. Now let's get to the next part of the discussion, which is how far-reaching does this lois assay and assay go? In other words, like I said, the pasuk is talking about a very specific case: a person killed in bezdin. And a person that's killed in bezdin, like I said, the bezdin does these things during the day. So this person is being killed. So the pasuk says, don't do lina, right? There's a prohibition, don't do lina. Rather, bury him that particular day. So there's a lois assay and assay about this case. And the question is, does the lois assay and assay apply to the average person that passes away? Okay, so take a look at Marmakum number 5. Before we get to let's go to Marmakum number 6. Marmakum number 6 is like this. It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara said, well, fine, let's do number 5. Might as well. The Gemara in Sanhedrin is going on a Mishnah. So the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin, Mem Vav Mid Aleph. It's talking. The Mishnah over there is talking about the halachas of Misas Bezdin, of how Bezdin would carry out their punishments. So over there, the context is talking about how skila took place, and it says in detail that the person was killed with skila, and then they would hang him up from the 8th, like the pasuk indicates you're supposed to do. And then the Mishnah says as follows: Umatir noisamiyad, and they would immediately take him down. The imlon, and if the body would remain too long, if lina took place, then they would be violating a lois assay. Shnemer leisalin of lasei alates, right? Ki kevura tikbrenu. Again, the mission doesn't tell us, what exactly the timeline is. What does it mean to be lun? That's what we saw before, the Ramban versus the Radvaz. Is it the same time frame as the assay, or is it a different time frame in terms of waiting till the next morning? Okay, fine. But the Mishnah just tells us this idea that there is this violation, there is this lois assay of leisalim. It's interesting. The Mishnah doesn't tell us about the assay of kevura tikbrenu. But the truth is, we do find many places in Chazal there's such a term as meis mitzvah, right? So meis mitzvah. Well, meis mitzvah means a person needs to be buried, right? And so The word, as the word indicates, means mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to bury someone. So clearly there is a mitzvah to bury someone. Again, the Mishnah is focusing on the loisasei side of things, but I'll go upon him. The Mishnah tells us that this loisasei and definitely the asay as well apply to someone that was killed in Bezdin. But like I said, what about a regular citizen? So this is where the Gemara comes in. Maramaka number 6, the Gemara in Sanhedrin over there, Memvav Amud Beis, says the following thing: Rabbi Yochanan, Rishon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan says the name of Rishon Bar Yochai. Minayin l'malin es meisai sha'ivr olav b'loisasei. How do I know that this loisasei of loisalin, even though again the pasuk is talking about a specific case of someone killed in Bezdin, but how do I know, says Rishon Bar Yochai, that it applies really to everyone? So Talmud Leimer, so it says Rishon Bar Yochai a drasha. When the pasuk continues, ki kevura tikberenu, so it's a double language. Why does it have to say ki kevura tikberenu? It says it should say ki kevur or ki tikberenu. What's ki kevura tikberenu, a double language? So it says Rishon Bar Yochai, it's coming to add that this pasuk, right, although it seems to be talking about specifically a person killed in Bezdin, the extra word tikberenu comes to add that this pasuk is talking really about everyone as well. From here we see that extra word, that the loisasei that the pasuk started with of leisalin, it's really referring to anyone that passes away, that the family or the kevura kadisha that are involved and in charge of the kevura, they have to make sure that they don't violate this prohibition of leisalin. So the same leisalin as we saw by Mrs. Bezdin, whatever that means. Either according to Ramban it means that day, or according to the Radvaz it means by the next morning. But whatever it is, that demarcation point of leisalin applies to everyone. That's the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Now the Gemara goes on in Maramaka number 7. The Gemara continues that not only do we see from this extra word that the loisasei of leisalin applies to everyone, but it also tells us that the asay of kevura tikberenu b'yamu also applies to everyone. And the Gemara says a ma'isa. Amrlei Shvur Malka l'Rav Chama. Shvur Malka was a guy. He was a non-Jewish person, and he was the Gemara calls him a king. He was like a high position of authority in that part of the world. So Shvur Malka said to Rav Chama the following question: Kevura min haTorah minayin. How do you know? Where do you guys get this idea from that there's a mitzvah to bury people in the ground after they pass away? That's what he asked Rav Chama, an innocent question. How do you know? Where's the source of this mitzvah? So ishtik. Rav Chama didn't answer. He said, I'm not sure. He didn't answer. He didn't say anything. Rav Chama bar Yaakov. So I guess this conversation or lack thereof, Rav Chama bar Yaakov heard about it, and he said a stark thing. He said, Imser Alma tipshoy. The Rebbeinu Shalom gave authority to people that don't understand. In other words, Rav Chama is a Talmud Chacham. He's a Gadol Hadar. And he has power and authority because of that. And the Rebbeinu Shalom gave it over to someone that didn't know how to say. He should have said, what should Rav Chama have responded? What's the source of there being a mitzvah to bury? He should have said, Ki kevura tikberenu. That even though that it says Ki kevura tikberenu, even though that pasuk, again, the simple reading is talking about someone who was killed in Bezdin, but again, the double language that Rishon Bar Yochai already said in the previous Maramakim, that extends the loisasei to everyone. The double language also extends the asay to everyone. So that's what Rav Chama should have told Shvur Malka, that the double lashon of ki kevura tikberenu is marbe, that the mitzvah of kevura tikberenu applies to everyone. So that's what Rav Acha bar Yaakov felt Rav Chama should have responded to Shvur Malka. Why didn't he? So the Gemara says, not because Rav Chama disagrees that that's the source, that is the source. The reason is, says the Gemara, that Shvur Malka was a guy. The concept of there being an extra word, and this extra word is a source for a drasha, Shvur Malka would not have heard this, he wouldn't have accepted it. So that's Rav Chama just didn't want to, whatever he would have said, Shvur Malka was not going to accept anyway. But I'll go upon him from the discussion back and forth from this Gemara. Again, we see this following thing, and that even though the pasuk, the loisasei and the asay are both talking to specific, it seems to be specifically talking about a guy killed in Bezdin, but based on the extra word tikberenu, both the loisasei and the asay apply to everyone. Okay, that's the simple Gemara. Okay, comes the Radvaz. So in other words, based on that, we would say the Pashtas that whatever the Gedarim are, whatever the timelines are for the asay and the loisasei, as we saw before, for someone that was killed in Bezdin, just carry that over to anyone that passes away. So that means that a certain person passes away in the middle of the day. So the asay obligates the family to bury them by before sunset. Cover tikbrenu b'yamahu. And if a person passes away, I don't know, in the middle of the night or whatever it is, then or let's say they violate, the person passed away during the day, but they didn't bury him that until before sunset, then already by the next morning they'll be in violation of the license of Lysolin, right? So those are the demarcation points. Comes the Ravaz with a chiddush. The Ravaz says a chiddush like this. In Marmukah number 8, the Ravaz is mechadish the following nikud, and I'll tell you outside what he says, and we'll see it together inside. The Ravaz says that even though in the Gemara it would seem that both the loisaseh and the aseh are equally and evenly being transferred over to everyone, says the Ravaz, not so. Certainly the loisaseh applies to everyone. That's clear in the Gemara. Shemar Yochai said that molin es meisai, that a person lets the body sit over and does lina, so you violate the loisaseh. That certainly applies. But comes Ravaz Chiddush and he says as follows. But when the Gemara says that the mitzvah of kevura applies to everyone, that just means the general mitzvah of burying. But the time frame of cover tikbrenu by yoimahu, that does not apply to every particular Jew. That's only specific to someone killed in Bezdin. That's the chiddush of the Ravaz. So the time frame of the lois asay applies to everyone. The time frame of the asay does not. Why not? Where is he coming from? So it comes to Ravaz like this. He says like this: the dafka lagabi haruge Bezdin. When it comes to a person killed in Bezdin, that's when the lav and the asay with their specific time frames apply. Avagabi hamolinis meisai, but an average citizen that passes away, ein sham el lav lovad. The time frame that you have to make sure the person is buried by, you only have to be concerned about the lois asay time frame, not the asay time frame. And he makes a point of this. And he says, because if you think about it, in the Gemaras that we saw, it's true that we had this whole, conversation for Malka with Rav Chama, this whole back and forth that sort of told us that there is an asay to bury. But the Gemara didn't just say simply, like Rishon Merchai said, how do I know that Hamolinis Mesa Yorver Balav? So he covered Tikbren. Why didn't he just say Hamolinis Mesa Yorver Balav Uba Asay? Like that straightforward line of Rishon Merchai was only said by the Lysa, not the Asay. Says Ravaz. What the Gemara should have said, so say it straightforward. The Lysa say with all of its time frames apply to everyone, and so does the Asay. Says Ravaz, the fact that the Gemara did not do that, the only aspect of these mitzvahs that the Gemara was very clear and precise and said it applies to everyone was the lois asay is for a reason. The lois asay, with all of its time frames and limitations of lina, that applies to every single person. A person passes away, the Chevra Kaddish and the family have to make sure that they don't violate Lysolin. And that's the time frame they have to think of Lysolin, whatever Lysolin means. But the time frame of asay, of cover tikbrenu b'yoymahu doesn't apply. There is a mitzvah to bury, but there's no specific time frame to fulfill that mitzvah. Why not? How did Chazal know to do this? That the lois asay with its time frame goes to everyone, but the asay with its time frame does not. So says the Radvaz like this: the time of the milsa. The reason is as follows: the bishlam haruge bezdin hayoim danin oisam babayker. Says the Radvaz like this. Here's his point. His point is that the only time frame, the time frame that the lois asay gives you, or the asay gives you, those are time frames that are able to, that Bezdin can always keep to that schedule. They could always keep that schedule. Why? Because Bezdin, for example, is only killing someone. They're only carrying a capital punishment during the day. That's when Bezdin functions, only during the day. So this person is going to be killed during the day. So automatically, once the person is killed like that, the asay of cover tikbrenu by yoimahu could always be fulfilled. There's no reason for Bezdin to push off killing the person 3 minutes before Shkia, where there's no time to bury him during the day. So Bezdin, they're scheduling their own, they're taking care of their own schedule. So because they know that there's a mitzvah because the pasuk says that there's a mitzvah to bury that day, so they could make sure that the person is taken care of within the time frame to fulfill that mitzvah. But says the Radvaz, but if you were to take this assay and its time frame to everyone, then you're automatically opening up a situation where many times you're not going to be able to fulfill this mitzvah. If a person lo aleinu passes away just a few minutes before sunset, there's simply not enough time to bury him by Yoimahu. Therefore, says the Radvaz, it's only logical for Chazal to take this mitzvah and expand it to everyone if it's going to be able to be fulfilled in every situation. But because, and it can be fulfilled if we're in charge of when a person passes away. So if you're Bezdin and you're in charge of when you're, taking the person, and giving him skila, so then you can make sure that you give yourself enough time of cover kevura b'yamahu, and that's why the pasuk obligates it, because it's possible. But once you're applying this essay to everyone, it's not up to us when a person passes away to make sure that there's enough time to fulfill b'yamahu. Therefore, says the Radvaz, it's illogical, even if Chazal have this lashon of tik berenu, that the assay applies to everyone, but to apply the time frame to everyone, that's not fair. It's unfair. It wouldn't be appropriate to apply the time frame to everyone if you know going in that it's impossible to ensure that the time frame is kept. It's just impossible. And therefore, says the Radvaz, the assay is applied to everyone, but only the concept of the assay, that there is a mitzvah, but the actual time frame and saying, but it has to be Yamu, it's impossible to carry that over to everyone. Says Radvaz, but that's all for the assay. That's all for the assay. The lois assay, with its time frame, can be carried over. Why? Because says Radvaz, the lois assay is what? Is loisalin. Loisalin means to, and this is the chiddush of the Radvaz, lina, according to Radvaz, means not just that the person's not buried by sunrise. It means to go through an entire nighttime from sunset to sunrise without the person being buried. And therefore, says Radvaz, even though if a person, let's say, passes away in the middle of the night, they would not be in violation of Leisalin if they're not buried by the next morning. You have to go through an entire nighttime. Therefore, says the Radvaz, whenever a person passes away, there is plenty of time for the family to make sure that the violation of Leisalin doesn't happen. Because whenever the person passes away, it's not like, there's a few minutes to sunrise and it's too late. No. If a person passes away a few minutes before sunrise, then the violation of Leisalin only kicks in the following day, the following sunrise. You have to go through an entire nighttime in order to violate that prohibition. Okay, so you got plenty of time to bury the person. So this is the chiddush of the Radvaz, that the asay is bayayimahu, which means whenever the person passes away, nightfall, that's the cutoff point. And because it's so rigid, and it doesn't leave us any window of time to deal with if the person passes away close to that demarcation point of nightfall. So it's impossible to apply this time frame to everyone. But the violation of the lois assay of Leisalin is not. It's not a time frame like sunrise. It's not sunrise. It's going through a 12-hour period of nighttime from sunset to sunrise. So if the person passes away right before sunrise, and they obviously don't have time to bury him till sunrise, they didn't violate Leisalin anyway. Leisalin is going to be till the next sunrise. You have to go through an entire nighttime of not being buried in order to violate Leisalin. And therefore, because of that, there's no problem with extending the time limit of Leisalin to everyone. Because whenever a person passes away, but you'll have ample time to bury the person in order to make sure you don't violate Leisalin. Yeah. Very good, very good. So this is we'll see in a second. This is a taina that many Yochanim have in the Radvaz. The Radvaz is interesting. Because you're right. In that same tshuva, he does bring Leisalin pula sacher as to indicate what lina means. And over here, as we'll see in a second, he is veering from the definition of Leisalin over there. It's a very, very good taina, and I'm going to make this point. This is a chiddush the Radvaz, that even though we're learning from the word lina to mean sunrise, but it doesn't mean just like that moment of sunrise can happen with a person not buried. It means an entire period of nighttime. And again, that's the point over here. Because of this side of the Radvaz, therefore we're able to explain and we can legitimize how the time frame of the lois assay is workable with anyone, with any particular person that passes away, even though we're not in charge of when a person dies. The time frame of Leisalin is still manageable, but the time frame of Bayoimahu is not manageable to every person because it's just not Not always is it possible of cover tikbrenu b'yom hu based on when the person passes away, and therefore that's the chiddush of the Ravaz, that the lois say with its time limit applies to everyone, but the say and its time limit does not. That will be the chiddush of the Ravaz. Now, but again, like you mentioned, this is the sheet of the Radvaz. But however, there's a number of Rishonim that disagree with the Radvaz. Most famously and forcefully is the Shagas Aryeh. Every opinion of the Shagas Aryeh, it's named Shagas Aryeh for a reason. Every opinion that he had was stark. He did not back down from a fight. That's for sure. Not from Rishonim, and certainly not from a Radvaz. So the Shagas Aryeh it's in Chadoshes in Siman Vav. The classic Shagas Aryeh is you're not going to find this in the classic Shagas Aryeh. This is a new say. It's not new. I mean, it's called HaChadoshes. It's very old at this point. But in Siman Vav, in the new Shagas Aryeh, so he says like this: Shemitzvah say likvars kol adam b'yoyim hamisa. So he says not like the Radvaz. No, just as the lois say with its time limit and time frame applies to everyone, says the Shagas Aryeh, so too does the say apply to everyone. The b'yoyim hu also applies to everyone. That there's a mitzvah say to bury someone that passes away b'yoyim hamisa, the day that they passed away. K'mayshin emar gabe nitlin ki cover tikbrenu b'yom hu. Just like the pasuk which is speaking about someone killed in Bezin, it says clearly b'yoyim hu. So when the Gemara in Sanhedrin using the extra word tikbrenu applies that pasuk to everyone, so it means the whole pasuk, including b'yoyim hu. He makes this point. It makes sense that you're using that extra pasuk of tikbrenu to apply the pasuk to everyone, but only partially. Cover tikbrenu to everyone, but not b'yom hu. Once you're extending the pasuk from that extra word to everyone, then apply it to everyone, the whole pasuk, and the b'yom hu as well. The mitzvah is kevura, just for the mitzvah of bearing, but not for the time frame. It applies to everyone. What about the point of the Radvaz that the b'yom hu time frame is just so limited, like not everyone's going to be able to keep that. But leisalin is manageable because it's a whole nighttime. Says the Shagas Aryeh, he's wrong about that point of the entire nighttime. Like you mentioned, it says the Shagas Aryeh Marmuk number 10 in Meis B'Laila. What we know from the Gemara clearly applies the Loisa say with its time frame to everyone. And so the Ravaz was assuming that the time frame for the Loisa say is not just sunrise, right? Because then you could have the same issue. Okay, what happens if a person passes away right before sunrise? There's also no time. Says Ravaz, no. That you'll always have time for leisalin because it doesn't mean sunrise; it means an entire nighttime. So if a person passes away right before sunrise, he's not in violation of leisalin that sunrise. He's in violation of leisalin 24 hours later. So you got plenty of time. Says Ravaz, you're wrong about that. That's not true. Just as you're assuming about the asay that it's sunset, and and it is what it is. Says Ravaz, the same thing with Lina. When it says Lina over here, it doesn't mean an entire nighttime. Lina means sunrise. Sunrise. Says the Shagas Aryeh, in Meis B'Laila, if a person passes away in the middle of the night, so it means he was alive in the beginning of the night. Right? So that's what it means. So he passed away in the middle of the night. By sunrise, that's called Laisalin. And you would violate that. Therefore, says the Shagas Aryeh, there's no room to separate and to distinguish between the Asay and Loisa say. Well, the Asay you can't apply because it's too limiting. But the Loisa say you can. It's not true. They're both limiting. So, what happens if a person passes away right before sunrise or right before sunset? So the Shagas Aryeh, okay, it's a minus. What can I tell you? Okay, so it is what it is. What happens if a person is sick on Pesach? They can't eat matzah. Okay, it is what it is. So I'm not going to, says Ravaz, says the Shagas Aryeh, I'm not going to start playing and manipulating the drushes of Chazal because sometimes it's too difficult. You can't fulfill that say properly. Sometimes you can't fulfill the list to say. What can I tell you? It is what it is. And so this is the opinion of the Shagas Aryeh, and for the most part, this is the opinion of most Achrayim. So halach l'maisa, the way most Achrayim work it out is that we assume. Let's break it down like this. Halach l'maisa, most Achrayim assume the following breakdown: that in terms of the guidelines of the time frame of asay and lois asay, we'll assume that again the asay is a person passes away, cover tikbrenu b'yom hu, and we assume like the Shagas Aryeh that it means the obligation is to bury the person by sunset. By sunset, if there's enough time to do it, then avada you have to do it. If there's not enough time, okay, it's a minus. What can I tell you? But the asay is what it is. It's covered the B'Yamahu. And then there's a lois asay. The lois asay is loisalin nivlasay alates, that you're not allowed to have the person not buried until sunrise. And the moment of sunrise, you're going to be in violation of the lois asay. And this is what we assume, like the Shagasari, and this applies to everyone. So a person passes away in the middle of the day. The asay tells you the person has to be buried by sunset. If a person passes away in the middle of the night, the lois asay says the guy has to be buried by sunrise. And that's the halacha that most achronim go with, assuming going with the Shagasari. Okay. Now again, that obviously is very tight. That's very, very tight. To fulfill the asay properly, or conversely, the lois asay, it's mamish just within that time frame of 12 hours. You know what I'm saying? Like, again, if the patir was during the daytime, then you got till sunset, based on the asay. If the patir was at nighttime, then you got till sunrise, based on lois asay. That leaves a very short window of time. So it's like this.
According to Ravaz, you have an answer why Rav Chama didn't say where there's a kivura there, because there is no essay.
Okay, right, exactly. According to Ravaz, the meaning, yeah, the Shagasari doesn't address that. He says, okay, why doesn't the Gemara say in more straightforward and forceful language that say applies to everyone like it did, but let's just say, okay, it doesn't explain.
You said there's an Indian of essay. It's not
He doesn't say it's lashon, but it's from the context of that tshuva, it is clear that he does talk about the mitzvah of meis mitzvah. There is an idea of a meis mitzvah, that's for sure. But in terms of it being bayamu, that's the Ravah says it doesn't apply. Okay, now in terms of, we're going to get in a moment. It's getting late. We're going to move a little quick, but now it's already easier. It's already easier now. We're going to get to now some heterim that are very, very important, but we'll first have a chumrah to then get us to a kula. You'll see what I mean. That pasuk that we started with, so it's everything we're learning is just breaking down this pasuk. So again, let's go back to Marmuk number 1, read through the pasuk again. Loisal nivlasei alates. That's the lois asay. Ki kavur tikbrena b'yaymahu. That's the asay. Then the pasuk continues, Ki kil laselakim taloi. Because why should the person be buried? It says the pasuk because it's a bizayin. That's the simple shot. It's a bizayin for the Rabbanu Shloim, for tzelem elakim, to be hanging like this and not to be buried. Then the pasuk ends with a very strange thing, and don't contaminate the land of Eretz Yisrael that the Rabbanu Shloim was giving you. Well, all of a sudden, Eretz Yisrael. What does it mean? What does it mean to contaminate the land? I mean, land can't become tamei. There's no. Karka doesn't become tummy anyway. So what exactly? And the land doesn't. It becomes less tummy when you put the dead body in the land. Like what does that pasuk mean exactly? So there's a chiddush from the Ramban. Okay, the Ramban on Chumash. It's interesting. It's really his own chiddush. It's not necessarily rooted in Chazal. It's not referenced in Chazal, I should say, in a clear way. But the Ramban says the following thing. Marmuk number 11. Don't contaminate the land by not burying the person. Don't let the body sit like that. Don't contaminate the land of Eretz Yisrael. Al das Rabbeinu, according to the Chachamim, einenu tam bolvad. This is not just a pasuk giving a reason for the mitzvah. The reason for the mitzvah was already given. Kikilas elakim taloi. It's a bizayin. It's a tzelem elakim hanging like that. So what does a pasuk then mean? And don't contaminate the land. Says the Ramban. First, it's not a reason. Shem ken yem mutar b'chutz la'aretz. Right? If that's the reason for somehow not burying a person contaminates Eretz Yisrael, then this whole thing should only apply to Eretz Yisrael. That's not true. It applies everywhere. So what does the pasuk mean? Avahu lav sheni. Says the Ramban, the pasuk is really introducing us to a new lav. We had one lav, which was all over the place, general leisalin, and now we're introduced to a new lav of loisatami esad mascha. What does that mean? Umin halav hazeh cover Yeshua malchei Canaan b'yayman. It's a chiddush. In Sefer Yeshua, Bez Hashem, actually Sunday morning, we're going to get to Bez Hashem. It's right around the corner. So there's a mitzvah that when Yeshua ben Nun, there's a number of kings in Eretz Yisrael gathered together to fight against the Jewish people, and Yeshua ben Nun wipes them out, and he captures the kings that made this attack on us. And the pasuk says each one of those kings are killed. And it says in pasuk, Yeshua ben Nun hung them up, even though you're not obligated. This was not Mises Bezdin like to Yidden, but that's what Yeshua ben Nun did. He hung them up. And the pasuk says, but he made sure to take them down and to bury them that day. Pasuk makes that point, that he buried them that day. Says the Ramban, why is Yeshua burying them that day? Says the Ramban, it was not because of Leisalin. Leisalin applies to Yidden. Why is Yeshua burying these Goyim Dafka that day? Says the Ramban, because there's this new lav of Leisatami Asad Mascha, and says the Ramban, it's a Chiddush, a new lav. This lav applies to anyone that dies, Jew and non-Jew, that in Eretz Yisrael they have to be buried that day. It's a new Chiddush. So until now, we've been talking about a say and a loisa say that applies everywhere, but specific to Yidden. Says the Ramban, now we have a new lav, which is only in Eretz Yisrael, but it applies to everyone in Eretz Yisrael, both Jew and non-Jew alike. Says the Ramban, umin alav hazeh, from this new lav of loisatami esad mascha, cover Yeshua Malchi Canaan, b'yoyman. That's why Yeshua ben buries these non-Jewish kings, that not just non-Jewish, they're Ovdei V'Dazar. He buries them the day that they were killed. Aval Pishein B'Tlias and Klala, even though these people were not a symbol of Tzelem Elokim, that it's a bizayin to Hashem to have them like this. Aval Hayibem Mishum Tumas Aretz, but Loisatami Esad Mascha, that there's something about Eretz Yisrael being in Eretz HaChayim, Kisham Tziva Hashem Esalkecha Sabracha Chayim Ad Ha'olam. The pasuk says Eretz Yisrael is called the land of the Chayim. So having any person that passed away not buried immediately, or Bayoimahu Al upon him, that's a violation of this new prohibition. That's the Chiddush. That's the Chiddush of the Ramban. So it's a Murdik Chiddush. So you have a new Chumrah that in Eretz Yisrael there's an extra severity of Bayoimahu that even applies to non-Jews. That's the Chiddush of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so until now it's been Chumrah, Tapa Chumrah, Tapa Chumrah. So it means that in Chutz La'aretz, for Yidden Al Kolpanim, we have an assay of that day before sunset, and a lois assay before sunrise. And in Eretz Yisrael, even to Goyim, you have an assay of Bayoimahu. You have a lois assay of lois time at Mascha, that the person should be buried that day. Okay, that's the Chiddush of the Ramban. There's another Gemara which adds another Chumrah, and from this we'll see some kulas. In Marmukah number 12, there's a Gemara Baba Kama. The Gemara Baba Kama in Pei Beis and Beis is talking about 10 unique qualities to the city of Yerushalayim. 10 unique qualities to Yerushalayim. And says the Gemara like this: Gemara Baba Kama Pei Beis and Beis. Asar Dvarim Nemru Yerushalayim. There are 10 inyanim that were said by Yerushalayim. And obviously the Gemara goes through all 10. And one of them is Ve'in Melinin Ba Esames. That in Yerushalayim, a body should not be left too long. A person should be buried right away in Yerushalayim. So that's what the Gemara says. So the Rishonim ask, in Yerushalayim, a person has to be buried right away. Molinis Mesa is a law from the Torah. It applies everywhere. All of Eretz Yisrael, specifically even to Goyim. What's Yerushalayim? What's this Chiddush of Yerushalayim? So what's the answer? So there are two answers. And to appreciate the answer, go to Marmukah number 13. Let's go back to the Mishnah Sanhedrin. The Mishnah Sanhedrin, again, was giving us the general, this idea of burying a person right away, how Mrs. Bezin takes place, and then right away they would take them off the pole and bury them. The Mishnah says, the heter. This is the heter for this whole sugya of lois say and say and so on. It says the Mishnah, Helinu l'chvaydai. Let's say the person is not being buried right away. The person's not being buried by sunset, not by sunrise, but it's l'chvoida. It's for the person's own honor. In other words, l'havilei arayin, the tachrichim. Let's say the person, they need to have more time to prepare an aron properly, or tachrichim properly, or the Rishonim give an extension, to give more time for more people to come to Levaya. So we're not talking about just delaying it as a bizayin to the guy, because we don't care. Adrabah, we do care about him. We wanted to have more dignified burial, more dignified levaya. Helinu l'chvaydai. Let's say the person is being left over and not being buried right away for his own kavod. Lahavi le'arim v'tachrichem ena over olav. Says the Mishnah, that's mutter. That's mutter. And the reason why the Gemara explains over there, that's based on the pasuk. Again, the pasuk talks about le'sal nevlasei al ha'etz. And even though we saw from the Gemara that it applies to everyone, but the reason, so why does the pasuk talk about so specifically a guy hanging on a pole? So says the Gemara, because it's using that as in a way of explaining the context of this isser and this mitzvah, that this is talking about leaving the guy on a pole like that, which is a bizayin. So anything that's that's not that type of inyan of letting the person sit without burial, similar to that situation of hanging on a pole. In other words, in a state of bizayin, just as an expression of not caring about the guy, that's a violation of the Leisasei and Nasei, appropriate to their time frames. But if you're doing it al tzkavid, because you want to give more time for the levaya or whatever the case may be, then that's adrab. That's not a violation at all. It's completely mutter. Based on that heter, based on that yisai, comes the Shita Mekabetzis and explains that's the difference between Yerushalayim and everywhere else. It's a huge chumrah that this inyan of a person being allowed to, you're allowed to delay a kevura for the person's own covet, to give more time for people to come to Levaya, to allow better preparations, v'chulu v'chulu. That's everywhere except Yerushalayim. Except Yerushalayim. Says the Shita Mekabetzis, Marmukah number 14. V'shema yesh leimer, perhaps one can answer why does, again, the question was in Baba Kama, that one of the unique qualities of Yerushalayim is that a person has to be buried right away. A person has to be buried right away all over the place. What's unique to Yerushalayim? The Yerushalayim ein lanin v'afil l'chvayda. That even if you want to delay the kevura in Yerushalayim for the purposes of the person's own covet, that is not allowed in Yerushalayim. Dilu ba'alma, whereas everywhere else, l'chvayda mutter. For the person's own honor, that's certainly mutter. In Yerushalayim, it's not. Now, this is a chiddush, and you should know, this is in fact, the Achronim bring down, the Gesher Chaim, many Achronim bring down, this is in fact the minhag. This is in fact the minhag, that in Yerushalayim, it's right away. They don't allow any time frame. Now again, when we just make this point clear, when I say Yerushalayim, I don't mean like, the I don't mean the borders of modern day Yerushalayim. We're talking about Yerushalayim, Kedushas Yerushalayim, which is basically like the old city. It's a sugya by itself how far the borders of Yerushalayim go, but the old city with maybe a few, little surrounding areas. Though bona fide Yerushalayim, a person that dies in Yerushalayim and they're being buried in that place, so then it's mamish. Even l'chvayda we don't delay. Person is is a resident in modern day Yerushalayim, but it's not halachically Yerushalayim. Then obviously that's not what we're talking about. But technically Yerushalayim, that's the halacha. That even if it's l'chvayda, the time frame of the asay and l'isasay are not. There's no. You're not allowed to violate the time frame of the asay and l'isasay, even l'chvayda. That's the chiddush of the Shita Mekabetzis. Say it again.
Yerushalayim is even larger. Everyone gets buried right away.
They do it right away, yeah. But I'm saying, technically speaking, it's really only the area of Kedushas Yerushalayim. Now, there's another explanation in the Rishonim to give another nakuda why Yerushalayim is there. How is Yerushalayim different and unique? With this one, then we'll go into the Pnimis just for a little bit. In Marmukah number 15, there's a Rashi. Rashi on Baba Kama over there. Again, the Gemara Baba Kama said Yerushalayim is unique, that the person needs to be buried. You can't delay. So says Rashi, Meis ba Adam ba Oisai Hayim, Kevrin Oisai Miyad. Says Rashi, when a person passes away in Yerushalayim, that day you have to bury him immediately. The Achronim explained that what Rashi is trying to point to is the following: that Yerushalayim has this quality of chumrah, that even the time frame you don't have till the end of the day. Yerushalayim is miyad. Meaning, even within that day, it's miyad. So you don't have, not only, there's mamish, immediately. There's no time frame, not till sunset. You can't delay it even until sunset. It's miyad. So the Gesher Chaim, for example, brings down, I saw this recently, he brings down that Shmuel Salant, who was the leader of Yerushalayim, was the Rav of Yerushalayim. So he was makbid on this. He never, and the interesting, Gesher Chaim says that when Shmuel Salant was alive, the Gesher Chaim says, I wasn't old enough and knowledgeable enough to ask him why he was makpid like this. But he does know that Shmuel Salant was makpid, that anyone that was being buried in Yerushalayim, died and buried in Yerushalayim, miyad. That it should not even to wait a couple hours, mamish miyad. And so the Gesher Chaim says, probably it was coming because of this Rashi. But this is all the chumras that we have. Again, so B'derech Klal, we have an interesting phenomenon over here, and this is going to move us into Pnimis just for a few minutes, which is that what started off as a mitzvah, generally speaking, when we have, there's two categories of mitzvahs, right? Mitzvahs hatzluyas baretz, and mitzvahs shein tluyas baretz, right? You have agricultural-based mitzvahs, and those that are Eretz Yisrael, Teki and Yanim, right? So they apply to Eretz Yisrael, Shumas Maisus, whatever. And then you have mitzvah shamefully baritz, mitzvah saguf, tefillin, Shabbos, kashrus. It's b'chol ma'ashavei seichem. It applies everywhere evenly. But we see after this whole discussion, what we see is an interesting phenomenon, is that it's like the closer you get to Beis Hamikdash, the more chomer this sugya becomes, right? So this inyan of burying someone, it's not a mitzvah Louis Baritz, it's not an agricultural inyan. It's a Melakim, a kavura adam, kikilas lakim toli. It's obviously a mitzvah on the God. It's a gaverdik inyan. It's a personal. It's an obligation on the body and the person, and so therefore it's only logical that it should apply everywhere evenly. But all of a sudden, again, each one for its own reasons, we sort of have this process that it applies everywhere, but it gets more and more severe and more chomerdik the deeper into Eretz Yisrael you go. So in Chutz La'aretz, there's an asay and lois asay. But first of all, it only applies to Yidden. And even the asay and lois asay, those boundaries can be crossed if it's for the person's covet. When you get to Eretz Yisrael, all of a sudden lois asay and asay apply to, like the Ramban said, it applies to even Goyim. When you get to Yerushalayim, not only does it apply to Goyim, but even the Heterim, the time frame, like according to Rashi, for example, the window of time becomes more severe, and or like the Shittim Gvesa says that the heter of l'chvoidai, of being able to do things and to wait things out because of the person's own covet, that also goes away. So it becomes more and more chomer. So the question is why? What's this? Why is Eretz Yisrael all of a sudden involved over here? Like is it Tamis at Mascha? Like what shaykh is to Eretz Yisrael? Okay, so maybe I left the fun part for 5 minutes. Okay, so it's like this. In the writings of Maharal, we find, what's this idea of kevura b'chlal? Again, this is now we're going to see how this mitzvah sheds light on the whole bria. And maybe it'll open some questions, and we still have Shabbos Ishbit supposed up, so I still have a heter of saying strange things and then just ending it and going right there. So it's like this. The Maharal says that the inyan of kevura is, we find this in Chazal. He's not making this up on his own. It's rooted in Chazal that the inyan of kevura is connected with the emunah in Techias HaMeisim. That the way the Maharal puts it, again, the language of the Maharal is that something that is bepoil. That's the language of the Maharal. Something that's bepoil. Bepoil means in the language of the Maharal, done. It's finished. Gamarnu. It fulfilled its purpose. There's nothing left. There's no more potential, involved in this thing. It's gamarnu. You finished. It's a empty soda can. It's gamarnu. It's bepoil. Says the Ramban, something that's bepoil, that's completely finished, so you leave that in the open. You leave that in the open. All of its inner content has already been unpackaged. It's done. Something that, however, still is bekoyach, something that still has more potential to it, automatically, when you're dealing with something that has potential, it already demands a certain level of tznius. It already demands a certain level of care. And so says the Ramban, if there would be no such idea of Techias HaMeisim, so it's bepoil. So like the body did what it was supposed to do, finished. I mean, it was supposed to be the vehicle for that person's soul for 120 years. It did its job, so finished. It's Gamarna. There's no reason to show it covet and dignity, because it's finished. It's an empty soda bottle. Says the Ramban, says the Maharal, the fact that we have a mitzvah of kevura means that the body is not done, that it's still b'kayach. There's more than meets the eye left to the body. The body still has more to say. And that's why it's being buried. It's being buried as a siman of its inner potential that has yet to be tapped, that has yet to be manifest. And that is what Techias HaMeisim is about. So the inyan of kevura, says the Maharal, is rooted in not just the belief in Techias HaMeisim, but it's rooted in the potential resurrection that's contained in the body itself. In other words, when we think of Techias HaMeisim, this is the chiddush of the Maharal. When we think of Techias HaMeisim, okay, it's one of the core beliefs of our faith. So what does Techias HaMeisim mean? The body's dead, it's lifeless, there's nothing there, right? But the Rebbeinu Shalom, we believe at some point is going to take the neshama, which the neshama is alive, and the neshama is going to come, that's the battery, is going to go back into the body will come back to life. But in the meantime, the body has nothing. The body is mamish nothing. Says the Ramal is telling us not like that. The Ramal is saying, no, it's not the shot. It's not only that we believe that the neshama is going to come and bring the body back. It means that right now, there's koiches in the body that are not being, that we have to believe in, that becomes apparent to us through our belief in Techias HaMeisim. In other words, we think, the way we tend to think of things, and this is even though the Maral doesn't expand on this too much, in the writings of Reb Shalom Dov Ber Lubavitch, the writings of Rashab, this is a big sugya, and it's also spoken about by Rabbi Nachman and Likut Moran in a number of places. Tonight's the Rav Noson's yard site. So we think that when we're talking about, let's say, Ruchnius versus Gashmis. So we tend to think that, listen, the reality that has life and has okay, let me put it this way. The Rabbanu Shalom is alive. The Rabbanu Shalom is Kel Chai V'Kai. Anything that's going to claim a title of being alive is going to have to claim a quality of godliness. Something is alive, it means it's only able to claim such a thing because it's connected to Elokus. The Rabbanu Shalom is alive, and if something wants to claim to be alive, it means it has to be connected to the Rabbanu Shalom. So we have this phenomenon. We have these two dimensions in reality: Gashmis and Ruchnius. Which one is alive? Well, if the definition of life means connected to the Rabbanu Shalom, then the way we tend to think of things is that Ruchnius is alive, the Neshama is alive. The Neshama Shnasat B'Tahiri, the Neshama is alive. That's the source of life. How is our body alive? Well, our body's alive because our Neshama, which is alive, is in our body. And the neshama is what's keeping our bodies alive. The body by itself has no life to it. Varaya. The neshama leaves the body. Look what happens. So then the body has no life to itself. This is something that we think of by the body, and by extension, this is what we think of Gashmias B'chlal. That Gashmias is dead by itself. Gashmias has no inner life. It has no inner life. In other words, another way to say that would be that Gashmias has no independent claim to Elokus to be able to say that it's alive. The only dimension of reality that can claim a connection to Elokus, and namely, therefore, to say that it's alive, is Ruchnius. Spirituality is the Olam HaYonim. Because there's such a thing that the Rabbanu Shalom did is mafulasis of taking the Olam HaRuchni, taking the divine, taking the higher dimensions of who we are, the spiritual world, and uniting with the physical. Now the physical is alive. The side of Techias HaMeisim is not that the neshama will come back. Like, if you look at it like that, then because the body doesn't have its own life source, it doesn't have its own existence by itself, it depends on the neshama. So automatically there's a principle in philosophy and in Kabbalah as well, that if something doesn't own something by itself, automatically it's going to be limited how long it's going to be able to borrow it for, right? If I don't, listen, if I don't have a car and I'm borrowing yours, maybe Stam Halva is 30 days. And let's say you want to stipulate more than 30 days. It's not forever, right? If I'm borrowing your car forever, then that's called me stealing your car, right? That's not, if I'm borrowing it, it means it's not forever. So if the body's life is borrowed from the neshama, then automatically it's not going to be forever. And that's why we experience life as finite. The person passes away. Because we experience life in such a way that Gashmis doesn't have its own independent connection to Elokus. The connection to Elokus is Ruchnius, and Ruchnius therefore is alive, and what keeps physical things alive is siphoning off of Ruchnius. So that's going to be limited by its very definition. It's not going to be forever. Comes Techias HaMeisim and reveals to us a deeper reality. What's Techias HaMeisim? The body will live forever. Why? Because it's going to be borrowing the car forever? No. The Chiddush of Techias HaMeisim is that just as the Rabbanu Shalom is Melech Bel Yoinim, he's independently Melech B'Tachtainim. That don't think of the body and Gashmias as being only connected to Elokus through its connection to Ruchnius. That's how we experience things now. The Chiddush of Techias HaMeisim is, no. Just as Ruchnius is saturated with Elokus, the Rabbanu Shalom is manifest in the Olam HaRuchni, he is also manifest in the Olam HaGashmi. Not only is that true independently, that Gashmi has its own feet to stand on through Techias HaMeisim, the Rabbi Rashab goes even further and he says, but the truth is, be'etzem, it's really fakert. It's really the body that's really sustaining the neshama. It's a chiddush. There's a lot to talk about by this, but to a certain degree, Ruchnius, Gashmius reflects the Rabbanu Shalom in a certain sense more than Ruchnius, because the Rabbanu Shalom can say I. The Rabbanu Shalom can say I. Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. That's the first way. That's the first word the Rabbanu Shalom introduced himself to us in Torah, is by saying I. Ruchnius, nothing in the world of Ruchni, in Malachim and Neshamas, would ever utter the word I. They would never have the ego to do that. The very definition of Ruchni is the Rabbanu Shalom's presence is so apparent that it's not about me. It's about how to serve the Rabbanu Shalom. The only creature that has the audacity to say I is a human being that lives in a physical world. Physicality, ironically, because it's the way we simply think of it is because it's so disconnected from the Rabbanu Shalom, so we fall into this mistaken notion that we have our own control, bechira, we have our own ideas, our own power, and that's true. Very often it brings us down to negative places. But Techias HaMeisim is going to reveal that the very notion, the very ability of physical reality, may be due to its distance from God's presence in an apparent way. But the reality is that physicality has ego. That, in a certain sense, is reflective of a much deeper connection to God, a much deeper similarity to God. Just like God can say Anoichi, so we can say Anoichi. The neshama doesn't say Anoichi. So in a certain sense, not only does Techias HaMeisim ultimately will reveal that the physicality has its legs to stand on in terms of its connection to Elokus, and it doesn't have to siphon life and connection to God off the neshama. It by itself is connected with the Rabbanu Shalom. In a certain sense, God's presence will be even more reflected through the Olam HaGashmi than even the Olam HaRuchni. Ki molar's deis Hashem k'mayim le'mechasim, that the real deeper understanding of who God is will be manifest through the earth itself. Ki molar ha'aretz deis Hashem k'mayim le'mechasim. Shemaim as well, but aretz davka. Therefore, the Indian of kevura, let's go back. The Indian of burying, says the Maral, is a revelation that the body has more than what you thought. The body has more than what you thought. Techias HaMeisim is going to reveal that the body, that the dividing line between Ruchnis and Gashmis is not as great as you thought. The Gashmis itself is Moli Elokus. And that's exactly what Techias HaMeisim is indicating. And the mitzvah of kevura is a reflection of that truth. We might not see it yet, but we have the mitzvah of kevura to indicate that there's more to this chaymer, to this physicality, than you thought. Because the mitzvah of kevura is a reflection of this nekuda, that physicality itself is just as deep as Ruchni and has its own connection to Rabbanu Shalom. It doesn't have to rely on Ruchnis for that. This is why Eretz Yisrael is so connected to this. And Dafka, as you get closer to Beis HaMikdash, Yerushalayim, and so on, it becomes even more apparent. The internet, again, it's the Rav Nassan's yard site. So Rav Nassan brings down in one place in the Kutei Sichas that in Sichas Ranam, that Rav Nachman was talking about Eretz Yisrael, and he was talking about the trees of Eretz Yisrael and the air of Eretz Yisrael. And so Rav Nassan said, Mastama, the Rebbe is talking about the Torah of Eretz Yisrael and the Ruchnius of Eretz Yisrael that you could maybe gleam off of the Avir. And Rav Nachman said, no. I'm talking about the trees. I'm talking about the stones. The Eretz Yisrael is not just a place on earth where there's more Ruchnius. The Shechina is B'chol Makim. The Chiddush of Eretz Yisrael is that the Gashmis of Eretz Yisrael is different. That's the Chiddush of Eretz Yisrael. That there's such a thing as mitzvah satulis ba'aretz. That the payers of Eretz Yisrael is different. And specifically the Beis HaMikdash, which is the epicenter of Eretz Yisrael, was not just a place to do Avodas Hashem. The Chiddush of Beis HaMikdash was a place that unified Shemayim and Aretz. That Shemayim and Aretz had equal footing with each other. The Gemara says the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and ever since then, the payers, fruit, don't taste as delicious. The sky, the blueness of the sky is not as clear. You want to tell me that since we're in Beis HaMikdash, we can't learn Torah as much? We can't feel the Rebbeinu Shalom's presence. This is no. The Gemara's examples are Paris is not as delicious. The sky is not as blue. It's because the inyan of Beis Hamikdash is not ruchnius. The inyan of Beis Hamikdash is shechina b'tachtoinim. Is that physicality has its own. It has its own connection to Rebbeinu Shalom without it having to be destroyed and undermined and broken apart to find the neshama. The body itself, kedushas haguf. Kedushas haguf, kedushas haaretz. That's exactly what Eretz Yisrael is. Therefore, this mitzvah of kevura, the deeper you go into Eretz Yisrael, the more chomer it becomes. Because the holiness of kevura is this nakuda of revealing of putting gashmis and ruchnis on an equal footing, of uniting ruchnis and gashmis, and making them equal. That it should be shava b'shava. This is the Indian of there's a lot to talk about. It's already late, but this is the Indian of the sun and the moon also. The moon always represents the body. And the body comes and goes. That's the death is like the moon. The moon gets to nothing, then it comes back again. The Chazal say that when Shlomo Melech built the Beis Hamikdash, that time of building Beis Hamikdash is called Sihara B'Shleimusa, where the moon was completely full. It's the fullness of the moon. It means that Gashmias became just as confident in itself, just like the sun. And that's what it means in the beginning of time, that so on, that the Shnei Meres HaGdolim, they were of equal size. And ever since then, it hasn't been like that. But with Techias HaMeisim, we'll return to that state. No, that's all Kopana with this mitzvah. So again, like I said, when you get to the pnimis of it, it sheds light on everything. That means, and this is the beginning, this is a major principle to Torah's Chassidus, that everything in Gashmias has the potential of being uplifted to Avodas Hashem. Why? Because again, Torah's Baal Shem is a reflection of Torah's Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, this Techias HaMeisim takes place. This Nakuda will become apparent that Gashmias has its own independent life force and connection to Rebbeinu Shalom, and even Akadekach, maybe even more than Ruchnius itself, and that's reflected in Avodas Hashem as well. Okay, so Hashem should bless us. We should be zeicha to be able to see Techias HaMeisim as Hashem the coming Mashiach. V'yas kol tzedek meher v'ymeinu amen.